I'd like each panelist just briefly to talk about what social justice issue is most pressing to them. There are many, we can't possibly cover them all. We can't do that in a little production review or in this session, but we can touch on some things. What has been burning in your heart?
Well, in most recent years, being a native of DC, can you hear me okay? Can you hear me? Okay. So I'm a native of DC. DC means the world to me. Over the years, it's not the DC I remember. And the demographic has changed completely, but the demographic is not the problem. The actual issue is the representation, the access, what will be given to my child as opposed to the child of a newcomer that can buy a home in Georgetown. There are a lot of disparities. Our family has been there for years, and maybe just 2 weeks ago, my little cousin was shot in cold blood. Okay? This is the first tragic death in my family in over 30 years. The neighborhood where I'm from was sort of, I think everybody's familiar with the turf wars of the 80s in DC. The area where I grew up was sort of a neutral ground. And over the past 10 or 15 years, due to efforts of people in our community, the youth, the boys were sort of organized into sports activities where they could sort of duke out their differences neighborhood-wise on the court. So fortunately, it saved a lot of lives. In recent years, some of those facilities have closed. The things I had access to as an 80s baby are not available anymore. So parents do have more work to do. Kids have less extracurricular activities to participate in, and that affects what they get into, what they have time to get into, a lot of distractions. My little cousin was not involved in any gang activity, but again, the influence of words, not just music, but words. We talked about words being political, about feeling pressure to not be political or otherwise. Again, being a student of Dr. Tony Medina, I never really thought otherwise. Words are definitely political. You should always talk about where you're from and make that universal. And so in some of the programs as I've gone abroad, I was more amazed that my peers were not engaging in social justice issues, or that they were in denial that their words were in fact political. Every word is political. Language is a tool of politics. The person that gave you the language gave you that language with the intention of guiding it towards a certain discourse. So the choice to, just in a specific poem, I did a project where I juxtaposed about 2 or 3 different poems. The overtly political poem, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, obviously political. I went into Lucille Clifton, Cruelty, Harriet Mullen, I forget. No, she has a poem called Cruelty. Yeah, Lucille Clifton, Cruelty. So whether there's an intention to be political, you are identifying a class, an activity, a location, what is on the minds of these people, what people have the luxury of not entertaining. So every word is political. So I as far as pressure not to be political, I think it's a bit of a denial to think that you can't be.
How old was your cousin?
21.
He's 21. Do you think about your own son growing up in Washington, D.C., and what his experience will be? How are you going to guide him?
Especially after the execution of Troy Davis. I'm sure his mom and his family invested a lot in him and loved him as much as I love my son. And I can't imagine my son I'm raising him to be a bright, happy, joyous child. And, I wonder sometimes if I'm setting him up or if I'm preparing him inappropriately, because he's, as a black young male, will have to face some really unfair things in life. And I would just die if something like that happened.
Well,
What happened to Troy Davis was to happen to my son, and
Well,
it's possible. That's why the slogan, the terminology, "I am Troy Davis." Any of us could be Troy Davis. So I think
Amen.
we all should be concerned about what took place on Tuesday. It's Wednesday. It affects all of us, and it's a denial to think it doesn't affect you.
Amen. We'll be praying for Langston. Brother Fernando.
The social justice issue that's closest to my heart is that because of a personal reason. My mother struggled with heroin addiction for 20 years of her life before she was diagnosed with AIDS at an advanced stage and died in 1991. My uncle, who was the closest thing I ever had to a father in my household, followed her about 2 years later. And then my little brother, who was 16 when my mother died, ended up getting into drugs, starting with crack, and then going into heroin, graduating to heroin. And he died the day after Christmas in 2007. So U.S. drug policy is really close to my heart, as is AIDS, because all three died of AIDS. But it really drives a lot of my work, and it really drives, the only reason I worked for the Obama campaign is because I saw a glimmer of hope that we could change the policies as they exist in this country. On a personal level, I believe that nothing will change as far as, I was raised poor and on welfare, and I've seen these kids coming up. I grew up with these kids, and when you have nothing to look up to except the basketball player on the TV screen or the football player on the gridiron, or the drug dealer that's actually in your neighborhood driving the nice car, what are you going to choose? What are you going to choose but to go out there and sling drugs? And the sad thing is, if you read books like Freakonomics, these kids could make the same amount of money if they were working at McDonald's, because it takes time to get to the top of that game. So, I find that expressing myself verbally allows me to channel that anger, that fear, that frustration, that pain, that sense of mourning that I feel, not just for my family, but for every kid coming up behind them.
All right, real quick. My grandfather died in 1997. It wasn't until maybe a year ago that I found out that my grandfather was illiterate. He hid it really, really well. Because my mother was like, why do you think it took him all Sunday to read the Sunday newspaper? It's because he was scrutinizing every word, studying everything. A lot of what he knows, he's memorized. He was a self-taught electrician. But again, he only had like an 8th grade education because there was a point in his life where he had to work in order to eat. And school wasn't in, the equation, in the 1930s for him in the South and such. So pressing for me is probably illiteracy, just because I grew up around books. Both my aunts, librarians. Most of my grandparents, teachers, elementary school teachers. So for me, it was about like the read word and the written word. And
where
so
was
now,
this?
huh?
Where was this?
Charlotte, North Carolina. That's where I'm from. And I'm a teacher, so I teach middle schoolers, and I also teach high schoolers. And one of my fellow teachers is out there. He can attest to it. We teach poetry, but at the same time, when we bring poems to class or we bring books to classes, of 4th or even 6th and 7th graders, and they're like, writing again? Oh, we have to read this? And it amazes me to hear kids say, reading makes my head hurt. And I would always tell them, that's your brain getting wrinkly. That's what that is. So it's supposed to hurt. It's a muscle. So you got to work that out. But for me, illiteracy is just a amazing, a big social issue for me, because all of these beautiful words that we're talking about, politics and beauty, it doesn't mean anything if folks can't read the written word. If you think you've missed stuff now, just for what you can't flip open a book or read something, that's a balancing act within itself that you're going to have to do.
Let me ask you, what do you think is happening in black culture that has precipitated this lack of literacy, interest in literacy, what might appear as if a more keen interest in popular culture?
Oh man, I can just go from my own personal experience, but I remember just having older kids than me when I was younger. Why you read all the time? Why you in a book all the time? Why are you doing that? Oh, oh, why are you raising your hand in class all the time? Why are you saying this? Oh, why do you talk like that? Oh, what you trying to be white, as white equals smart, black, or a person of color equals not smart but popular, that type of things. Whereas I had a family that was like, oh, what do anything that I imagined from what I read, and I come to with my crazy imagination about characters and stuff, like, oh, that's very good. Write that down, and making stuff a possibility, and being able to go to the library when my mom had to work and just stay there all day and have a ball. But just seeing that prevailing idea that reading makes you soft, learning makes you like corny, and all those types of things.
Who teaches our children that?
I'd have to say probably what my grandmother would call the idiot box teaches us that. Even though there was PBS was probably the main station that I watched, but popular culture teaches you that. Just like you were talking about, if you're without options and you're in a community where it looks like the only way you're gonna make money, is selling drugs or whatever, then that's gonna be the option. Me, I'm proud to tell people like, so what? Wow, you look like you're doing all right. What you selling? Like, I sell books. I work at a bookstore. I was a librarian. I'm slinging books. You want to know what I'm doing? I got that. What you want? You want Medina's book? What you want? I got you. You want some Howard's Inn? Oh, I got that in the back. I can get that for you. So, and I'm proud to say that. And I don't know. The one thing I'll tell the kids, it's all right. Be smart. Kids want to stand out and not stand out. They want to stand out and not stand out. So yeah, so I'm like, nah, man, just
want to say something.
Step out this. That's all.
I just wanted to add, and it's a social conundrum that in 2011 we still have African American families with first generation high school graduates, and so that's something else that it's a consideration. If you don't have books in your house, if you haven't gone through the experience, if that's not your lineage, then how do you break into that? How do you break that cycle?